homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today in the kitchen, we are making a perennial favorite of mine, which is falafel. I lived in Boulder, Colorado when I was in my early to mid 20s, and downtown on Pearl Street, which is an outdoor walking mall, there was a little falafel store called Falafel King. I don't know if they're still there. It was a small chain, and they used to make falafels from scratch, homemade. They had a little machine that would plop out the little falafel balls into the oil, so they were super fresh and hot. And I was a pretty picky eater. I was just starting to kind of come out of my picky eating phase and realized that there was a lot more to the world than the things that I had been eating, and that I wanted to expand my horizons. And so I very gingerly tried falafel. And what I pretty quickly learned was I love falafel. It's garbanzo beans with different herbs and spices, and they are deep fried typically, traditionally, and they're Middle Eastern, but every country and every region has their own recipe, and they can vary quite a bit. Sometimes they're made with garbanzo beans, sometimes there's fava beans or combinations. And so when I first started trying to make them myself, I was pretty intimidated by the process. And I looked up a bunch of recipes, and this is kind of early days of the internet, and found recipes that called for just a can of garbanzo beans that were then ground up and fried. And then I found recipes that called for raw garbanzo beans that were ground up and fried. And what I quickly learned is authentic falafels are not made with cooked garbanzos. They're soaked garbanzos, so they've been rehydrated, and then they're finely ground and fried. And it's going to give you a completely different texture and a different flavor, and they're going to hold together differently than if you use a cooked garbanzo bean. And so that would be my first piece of advice, is recognize and go into it with raw garbanzo beans rather than cooked garbanzo beans. And then some of the recipes I was finding had a lot of binder in them that was wheat flour or variations on wheat flour. And a traditional falafel will not have wheat flour in the mix. And I really don't like falafels made with wheat flour. I think they're super gummy and not very tasty. And so the trick is to get a mixture that will hold together without using some kind of a binder like wheat flour. I have 2 or 3 different recipes that I've tried, probably something from Serious Eats, probably something from America's Test Kitchen. And what I finally have come to realize is there's really no one go-to falafel recipe, and that it's really just raw ground garbanzo beans, herbs and spices, some onion, and then, a texture that will stick together. I don't normally deep fry. We don't use our deep fryer hardly ever, but I had been in the process of processing all of my potatoes from last year, and some of that includes making basically frozen French fries. And so I par cook the French fries, cut them into French fry shapes, par cook them in a deep fryer, and then throw them in the freezer, and then we oven bake them when we want fries. It's a great way to get essentially a frozen French fry from your own garden in your own freezer. I have a video on that. I'll put a link to that below. And so I had the deep fryer out. Normally when I make falafel, I just pan fry these in 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of oil, and then just flip them over to get a nice crispy texture on them. But because I had the deep fryer out, I thought I'd go ahead and deep fry these falafels. The key is you want to cook these long enough that the interior gets all the way done. You definitely don't want to be eating a falafel where the interior is not fully cooked. And they are best right out of the fryer. One of my biggest gripes with some of our local falafel places, they're making them ahead of time and then just reheating them or leaving under warming lights. And falafels really don't hold well once they've been made. They need to be eaten right out of the fryer, and right out of the fryer they were just absolutely delightful. But reheated or under warming lights, they get kind of stiff and chewy, and they lose their crispness, and they're just not really good. So my advice is make enough of these that you can do one meal and try to eat them as fresh as possible. I don't think they're great reheated. But homemade falafels, a really great vegetarian or vegan dinner, and a great source of plant-based protein. Falafels, let's get started. So this recipe comes from Make It Dairy Free, which happened to show up at random on my Instagram account, and it looked interesting. It had some slightly different spice combinations than what I'm used to, and so I decided to give it a try. So this is 2 cups of raw organic garbanzo beans that have then been soaked in enough water to completely cover them as they expand overnight, so about 8 hours. And then I'm just draining and giving those a really good rinse in the sink. And then the recipe called for roasting some garlic in some olive oil. I have some roasted garlic pucks, and so I decided to use those instead. And then to that, I'm adding the juice of about a half of a lemon and a little bit of olive oil. It was supposed to have lemon zest, and I misread the recipe. No harm, no foul. And then we've got a tablespoon of cumin, 2 teaspoons of ground coriander, and this is coriander from my own garden, a couple of teaspoons of sea salt, some turmeric, this is a little bit unusual, some ground black pepper, some cayenne pepper, optional of course, these are from my own cayennes, and then this was unusual, a little bit of garam masala, which is a mix of a lot of warm spices. And then we're going to put everything into our food processor. So we've got our 2 cups of rehydrated garbanzo beans. This is a half a cup of frozen cilantro, about a third a cup of fresh parsley, a little bit of dried dill that I happen to have left over, our garlic lemon juice oil mixture, and then all of our spices. And if anybody's paying attention, spoiler alert, there's something I forgot here. I'm adding a tablespoon and a half of gluten-free flour here. He called for garbanzo bean flour, and I did not have that on hand, and then a teaspoon of baking powder. And the baking powder is optional, but it does make them a little bit more fluffy. And so I'm going to grind this and then scrape down the container really well and then grind it again. I'm going for as smooth of a consistency as I can get here. And I don't want it soupy. And so this is tricky because I want it to hold together when I scoop it. So you don't want to add too much liquid or you're going to have a very hard time keeping it in a ball when you fry it. Anybody realize what I forgot? So here's the mix. And you can make this ahead of time and just stash it in your fridge and then use it as needed. It'll hold for 3 or 4 days in the fridge. And you can see this is pretty chunky. So that just got stashed in the fridge. And then I realized, oh wait, I completely forgot to add the onion. And so right before I got ready to actually make falafels, I dug everything back out of the fridge, threw it back in the food processor, and mixed in 1 small onion and just let that spin. And it'll loosen this up. There's quite a bit of moisture in onions. And so this is gonna loosen this mixture up quite a bit. You can see how much easier it is processing in the food processor with that extra liquid in there. So sauces typically going on our falafel, you can mix and match however you like here. That's actually a tahini dressing. I'll put the recipe for that below. It's from Erica at It's a Flavorful Life, fantastic. Some pickled red onions. This is a tzatziki, which is basically yogurt, lemon juice, garlic, and cucumber. Some feta, of course, and then some greens that we had on hand. And then our pita pockets. I've actually made these from scratch, but I'm mostly not doing a lot of wheat right now, and so we just bought these at the store. This is our fryer. The oil is piping hot. And then this little disher is really handy. I could have made these bigger, but I really like a lot of surface area to mass. And so I went ahead and kept these fairly small. And then I dished in probably 15 or 20 because they were so tiny, and they will start to float almost immediately. Give them a stir, make sure they're broken up so they're not sticking to the bottom and sticking to anything else. This fryer does come with a fry basket, but it doesn't go all the way down into the bottom of the fryer, and so I just use a spider to fish things out. This is after just about a minute, but I wanted to make sure everything was thoroughly done inside, and so I cooked these for 5 minutes. So here they are, they're done. They're nice and golden brown, but not burned. So yummy, you guys. You can just pop these in your mouth like popcorn. They're just delicious. And again, you can do this in a fry pan, roll them in your hands, flatten them out just slightly so they're more like a puck instead of a round ball, and fry them in a skillet. It works just as well. So there you go. There's our finished falafel. And again, I didn't make all of that batter. I saved the rest for a different night. But here's the fried falafel. We were snacking on them as they came out of the fryer. And then here's the finished falafel sandwich with tzatziki on the bottom, and then some nice greens, including some spinach, And then this lovely tahini sauce, which I kind of riffed on a recipe, really delicious. And then the little bit of pickled red onion, oh, chef's kiss, really delicious. So falafel, you guys, give this recipe a try. Definitely worth the effort. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.